Let's stop doing Shakespeare for 25 years.
We're talking about people's perception of approaching the language and the language being difficult. I mean, you see that, you see, I don't know how many people I've talked to that went, yeah, I did Shakespeare in school and I hated it. What can we do about that perception, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I knew the answer, I'd be doing it. I mean, there is a sense in which it does come down to education.
Yeah.
Tongue in cheek here, just tongue in cheek. I'm not sure whether the answer is changing the education or removing Shakespeare from the curriculum. That is letting people come to Shakespeare in their own time, because people are still going to produce Shakespeare, and that is quite tongue in cheek. There's all these other theatre companies who rely on schools and workshops for a lot of their income are like screaming at me and getting their daggers out now because it's their bread and butter. But I think it was Bogdanov, it's Michael Bogdanov, the Shakespeare director who in the UK, he actually proposed that there be a 25-year moratorium on Shakespeare productions. It's like, let's stop doing Shakespeare for 25 years. And that was slightly tongue-in-cheek, but his argument was that even in the performance of Shakespeare, what had come in was a kind of sense that if we're going to do this thing, Shakespeare, that everyone's always doing, we have to radically reinvent it. And that's actually one of the other obstacles to a clear comprehension, is that something that is already seen as hard to understand or hard to appreciate then gets these clever directors and companies layering more stuff on it. Like, I'm sure everyone will understand The Tempest better if it's set in the 25th century on a space station, right? And I mean, by all means, nothing wrong with a play set in the 25th century on a space station that's something like The Tempest, then rewrite it, write a new one, right? Because when you take Shakespeare's text and go, no, we're going to do this clever thing and this on it, you're actually putting more layers that need to be understood, that need to be unpacked between the text and the audience. It's kind of like you're putting more obstacles in. You're not really illuminating much at all. So he wrote an essay, and I don't remember its name, but it's the one in which he proposes a 25-year moratorium on Shakespeare to basically stop this idea that we have to keep making it fresh. Whereas it's like, well, if you want to make it fresh, just stop doing it for a generation, then it'll be fresh. And that has happened in history. I mean, I don't think there's been any time since Shakespeare's life that people stopped doing Shakespeare, except for that generation where there was no theatre at all in England when the Puritans were in charge. But so, I mean, that counts, I guess. But there have been periods where Shakespeare's kind of fallen in popularity, or certain plays that used to be really popular, like Coriolanus, are just not done by anyone for a generation or so. And people even go, that's his worst play or one of his worst plays. And then it gets rediscovered. But it's not rediscovered because someone finds a weird new way to do it. You know, we'll set it in a submarine at the bottom of the mid-Atlantic trench or something. But rather because they rediscover the play as it is and go, hang on, and it's fresh because people haven't heard it for a while, people haven't thought about these things for a while, or because history comes around again, as it always does. And so I think, you know, there might be some value in either rethinking Shakespeare education, or putting a pause on it. Maybe not. Although that's certainly happened in the drama curriculum. You know, you don't, while it's still kind of compulsory to do Shakespeare in the English curriculum, the drama curriculum has kind of, it's not compulsory. And in fact, a lot of teachers will avoid it, but there I think it's for the wrong reasons. There it's because they feel like they don't know what they're doing, or they, you know, they had a bad experience with it. So let's just do something else. But it still is quite foundational in contemporary English language drama. Another thing I think would be, and it would be quite refreshing, I think, if more companies did, as many companies are doing, and this is one of the things the American companies do very well, and is probably one of the reasons they've had huge success with Shakespeare in the United States across all walks of life, all classes, all ethnicities and races. and gender identities and so forth and ability levels, is that they really go into the word. They do that thing that I was saying, which is like, not, hey, wouldn't it be fun to blah, but to start with the language and go, what are these words telling us? Because then anything that grows out of that, any concept, will grow out of the words rather than being something you lay over the words that has to be, you know, seen through. You have to see through the fog of all the cleverness before you get to what the words themselves are saying.
Yeah, interesting. I was going to ask because I know that QSC has done, different kind of versions of the shows. And I remember, was it Two Gents, I think, that had some Mexican banditos?
See,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Two Gentlemen of
So,
Verona, right?
yeah.
So someone would look at that and go, you're a hypocrite, because Two Gentlemen of Verona was a Western, the way we did it. That is, it was kind of set in the Wild West, except we didn't talk like this. Because we're all as bad at doing it as I am. But rather, we spoke in our own voices. And that's one of the other things, and this only happens in Australia, is people seem to think you have to do Shakespeare in this plummy accent. I'm speaking Shakespeare now. And I often say, why are you doing that? And they're like, isn't this the way you're supposed to do Shakespeare? Which is bizarre, because that accent did not exist when Shakespeare wrote the plays and would not exist for another 200 odd years after he died. So there's no way he intended us to speak language like that. And I always say, speak it in your own voice. So we spoke it in our own voices, our own accents, not singular, but plural, because we also have many ethnic groups, backgrounds, etc. in the company. Anyway, we did it as a Western. So the play is set in two cities. It's set in Verona, Two Gentlemen of Verona, and it's set in Milan. And what we did was, Verona was kind of like this mid-19th century industrial city. So think Gangs of New York, it was that kind of, and that aesthetic. And Milan, where most of the action happens, was the Wild West. So we had hay bales, go hay bales. You're no stranger to hay bales, Paul. I know that.
Big fan.
The stage managers aren't a fan, though.
No, they hate them.
When they get soggy after a week or two.
Start to fall apart.
So we did. We had the gentlemen were kind of like young cowboys. The Duke was like the sheriff. He was still called the Duke, but he had a sheriff's badge. And they all had big hats, which the lighting designer hated, because it's really hard to light actors who are wearing cowboy hats. We had side lighting. Yes, we did the troubadours that show up to serenade Sylvia were a mariachi band. The bandits, I mean, it's in the script, right? Bandits in the forest. So of course we had banditos, or like outlaws, and they refer to themselves as outlaws. In fact, they're not called bandits, they're called outlaws. I remember now. But why did we do that? Oh, and I played a character who is a servant, a clown servant who has a dog. And I happened to have a dog at the time who has gone to the Rainbow Bridge, sadly. But and the dog was on stage with me, stole the show, of course. Was it W.C. Fields said never act with children or animals? I would say always, because they are the best acting teachers. They are never not in the moment.
True.
And if you try and do something other than what the animal wants to do, guess what the audience is looking at? The animal, because that's the one that's real, right? So it's a real lesson in working with what you're given and not manipulating, because you can't manipulate, or you can. I had some treats in my pocket, so I did slightly manipulate the dog. And my character, the servant clown, was kind of a bit like one of those Gold Fossicker kind of characters from the Old West. So, but why did we do that? How is that not just layering something on? Well, the whole idea came from the struggle with the end of that play. At the end of that play, to put it bluntly, there is an attempted rape, basically.
Yep.
One of the gentlemen of Verona attempts to assault the woman he believes he's in love with, who is actually betrothed, in love with his best friend, the other gentleman of Verona. Anyway, there's this horrible attempted assault, and the other gentleman, who happens to be in hiding with the outlaws, sees this, leaps up, in the script, gets his sword out or whatever, and you know, says, "What the hell are you doing? You've betrayed me. I thought you were my friend." And the rapist or would-be rapist immediately breaks down and apologizes. And the tricky thing with this play is that his friend just goes, "Okay, well, I accept that. It's all good. Let's all, you know, go in and, you know, each marry our respective." And it's kind of baffling. And the question we had is, in what world does that make sense? I mean, forgiveness is wonderful, but this kind of sudden, "Okay, that's good. We're best mates
good.
again."
Yeah.
It's all good. And of course, the female characters,
With no regard to the woman at all.
to say, they have no dialogue. And in looking around for a world in which that, excuse me, could be understood by a contemporary audience, it was that real, pardon the French, bros before hoes kind of mentality. So we could have said it in an NRL team or something.
Yeah, I was just thinking football.
Yeah, absolutely, and that would have been fine too. We chose the Western trope because it also gives you a bit of aesthetic distance, which is like, this is a recognizable world. It's a world our audience will understand, but it's not so close to home that, because sometimes there's a danger actually in showing stuff that's too close to home, which is the audience psychically defends themselves against it and appreciates it intellectually, but doesn't really let it resonate. It's a fine balance. Now we're getting into aesthetic discussions, but so that was the reason behind that. So I would say, of course I would, because I directed it. So I'm going to say I was great. That to whatever extent it was successful, the intention there was to illuminate an important part of the text, to kind of bring it forward into a trope where people could understand it.
Big thanks to Rob Pensilfini, Artistic Director of the Queensland Shakespeare Ensemble. Now, QSE do amazing work with Shakespeare, and you can learn a little bit more about that through the links in the description below. And down there will also be a link to the mini playlist of all the videos that I shot with Rob around aspects of Shakespeare. He is a wealth of knowledge, so definitely check that out. It would be great if you give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and if you haven't already, share it with someone who you think might need it. Thanks very much. Have a look at some of these other Shakespeare videos, and I will see you there.